It is the Resistance Report for March 31st, 2017. The subject tonight is Michael Flynn. But I want to put it in context. Again, the purpose of our Resistance Report is to give you sort of an understanding of what's behind the news and how the news relates to everything else. Now, the first thing you ought to understand is that if you have a high-ranking official who seeks immunity from prosecution, it generally means that he or she has something to hide. They don't seek immunity from prosecution if they don't have something to hide and if they don't have something to worry about. The other general rule is that if they get immunity from prosecution, it means that they can offer up bigger fish. Now, if you're talking about somebody like Michael Flynn at that level, the only bigger fish that he can really offer up that would justify immunity would be Donald Trump. So the stakes are fairly high here. And you can get a pretty good idea of what's going on in terms of whether he actually gets immunity and also from whom. He's asked for immunity from the Congressional Intelligence Committees, both the House and the Senate, and he's also asked for immunity from the Justice Department. The Justice Department immunity is a bigger deal. The Senate Intelligence Committee has already said that it will not give him immunity. Now, just for background here, Flynn first met Donald Trump, met him in August 2015. That was just weeks after Donald Trump entered the presidential race. And only a few weeks later, Flynn appeared on RT. Now, that RT is Russia's propaganda machine. It's an English language TV network. And that was just a few weeks after Flynn met Trump. And then in December 2015, Flynn gave a paid speech in Moscow and attended the RT's 10th anniversary gala, and he sat next to Vladimir Putin. Now, this doesn't mean that necessarily there was anything wrong, but it does set up a set of relationships. Remember, he met Trump in August 2015. Several weeks later, just a few weeks later, he goes to Moscow and gets this kind of treatment from Moscow. According to the Washington Post, Flynn collected nearly $68,000 in fees and expenses from Russia-related entities that year alone, 2015, including some $45,000 for the RT event that he went to. And then Flynn became known in the Trump campaign for his attacks on Hillary Clinton. He really was one of the Clinton attack dogs. At last summer's Republican National Convention, you may remember he led delegates in a chant of "Lock her up." And then last September, he was very eager to comment on Clinton aides who got immunity agreements in the FBI's investigation of Clinton handling of classified information. He said, and I'm quoting, this was Michael Flynn, just last September, "When you're given immunity, that means you probably committed a crime," unquote. And that at a rally 2 days later, a campaign rally, Donald Trump echoed the same theme, saying, if you're not guilty of a crime, what do you need immunity for? It's interesting to remember those recent statements. Then last December 29th, remember this is happening pretty quick in sequence. December 29th, President Obama announced that in retaliation for Russia's meddling in the election, and by that time Obama had FBI information that Russia had interfered in the election, the United States would expel 35 Russian diplomats, close down 2 Russian diplomatic facilities, and impose additional economic sanctions. Now, it was that day, December 29th, a very sensitive moment in U.S.-Russian relations, when Russian Ambassador Kislyak texted Michael Flynn asking if they could talk. Now, everything I've said to you is now well documented and also very much in the open. I'm not revealing any new information, but the sequence is important to keep in mind. In that call on the 29th of December, the same day that the sanctions and closings were announced. The two of them, Kislyak and Flynn, discussed those sanctions. That was the subject. That is why Kislyak called Flynn. That call turns out to have been monitored by American intelligence. And the transcript of what Kislyak said and what Flynn said was circulated within the Obama administration. After Flynn's phone call with the Russian ambassador, Putin announced soon after that he would not retaliate against Obama's sanctions. And then, almost immediately after that, Donald Trump issued a tweet, a very celebratory tweet, in which he said, quote, "Great move on the delay by V. Putin. I always knew he was very smart," unquote. Now, fast forward to January 13th, the day after the fact of the call, but not the contents of the call, but the fact of the call between the Russian ambassador and Flynn became public. Trump spokesman Sean Spicer told reporters that the call, quote, "never touched on the sanctions," unquote. Move ahead. Just a few days, actually, January 26th, the FBI has notified Sally Yates, the acting attorney general, who was later fired by Trump, and told her that they had information that Flynn had actually talked with Kislyak about the sanctions. And she then turned around and told the general counsel in the White House that Flynn's account of what he discussed with the Russian ambassador was false, and therefore made Flynn vulnerable to blackmail by the Russians. Now here's where it gets interesting and a little bit tricky, because despite all of this, despite Yates's warning, despite the FBI warning through Yates about Flynn, despite the fact that the White House then knew, and Trump presumably then knew, if he didn't know already, Donald Trump doesn't do anything. He waits for 2 weeks before he does anything about Flynn at all. In fact, just 2 days after Sally Yates reports the problem, a huge problem, to Trump's counsel, just 2 days later, on the 28th, Flynn was on the phone call when Trump and Putin held an hour-long conversation. He was right there. So the fact that Trump did nothing for 2 weeks is curious, to say the least, as was the fact that Trump seemed to know about the content of the call. He was not surprised that Putin acted in the way he did. So the question of whether Flynn should get immunity is interesting, complicated. From the Intelligence Committee's, well, maybe or maybe not. The argument against Flynn getting immunity from the Intelligence Committees, and by the way, the Senate Intelligence Committee has already said no, so the question is the House Intelligence Committee now. The argument against it is that, well, we've had cases in the past. Oliver North is the most celebrated, infamous case, I should say, where somebody's got immunity from prosecution for testifying, and that only goes to any action that the House or the Senate might bring against somebody. The House and Senate can't give immunity from prosecution, generally speaking. But nevertheless, that grant of immunity could taint the evidence in a subsequent prosecution brought by the United States against the person. Oliver North, in fact, on appeal, his conviction was completely thrown out, because the judge said that his testimony before Congress, even though his conviction wasn't based directly on it, somehow tainted the evidence that was used in his conviction. So that's a possibility. That would be a strong argument against the House giving immunity to Flynn. But the Justice Department has also been asked. The FBI and the Justice Department have also been asked to give immunity to Flynn, and it's a different issue. Because the question there is whether Flynn can really give the Justice Department and the FBI important information in their pursuit of the question of what really happened between Trump and Trump's aides and Russia in terms of possible collusion in the interference in the campaign. And you see how this all begins to look like a circle, because it's Trump's Justice Department that would have to make that decision. How can the Justice Department, even when Sessions has recused himself, how can the Justice Department decide? Trump is being investigated. Do you see the problem here? There is no way that the Justice Department can really make a fair decision about granting immunity if, in fact, Flynn has some very important information. What's even more unusual, what makes this so bonkers, so bizarre, is that this morning Donald Trump tweets Mike Flynn should call for immunity and that this is a witch hunt. Donald Trump says that it's his Justice Department that's going to make the decision about whether to grant immunity to Flynn. On the basis of what? Protecting Donald Trump or not protecting Donald Trump? This is why, friends, we have to have an independent special prosecutor, a select committee of Congress, and probably an independent commission. There's no way that these decisions can be made in an objective and fair way that the public can trust. As the evidence mounts, as the circumstantial evidence closes in on Donald Trump and his aides, we may have more instances, not just Flynn, Michael Flynn, but there may be other people like Paul Manafort, Roger Stone, others who seek immunity from the FBI, from the Justice Department, for telling what they know in exchange for an agreement not to be prosecuted. How can we trust that the Justice Department and the FBI under Trump will be making the right decision on all this immunity? The fact is we can't. All right, your questions. And they are coming up. All right. Andrew Landers. The rhetoric used in defending single-payer health care often frames it in terms of health care as a right. This only resonates with people who agree with this moral stance. How can we reframe universal health care as a good investment to get others to reconsider? Andrew, I think this is a terrific time for Democrats to reframe the issue entirely. Now, you say it should be reframed as an investment. Whether you reframe it as an investment or a right, just in terms of getting more care, better care to more people at lower cost, now is the time Democrats can say we really need a single-payer plan. We've got evidence that a single-payer plan is more efficient, reaches more people. Almost every other advanced country has it. It works. We don't have anything close. The Affordable Care Act is as good as it gets. And the Republicans are already attacking the Affordable Care Act as not working. Well, we ought to come right back to them and say, well, then we're going to do a single-payer plan. And you know something? We're going to do it on the basis of Social Security and Medicare, two of the most popular programs in the entire federal government. We're going to use that model. We're going to use the payroll tax. Kay Marie. I say no to Gorsuch when Flynn is saying what he is saying and the investigation is ongoing. Obviously, right? Kay Marie, you are correct. That is, I think it is important for Senate Democrats, when they vote next week, it's a week from today, on Gorsuch. That's when the vote has been scheduled, to be the next Supreme Court justice. I think it's important for them to vote against him and to filibuster, as Chuck Schumer wants to do. But the justification and logic should not be that Gorsuch is right-wing or he doesn't have the right credentials. That's a very difficult principle to stand on. No, there's a much easier and better and principled stance, and that is that Barack Obama had a nominee there, Merrick Garland, who the Senate, under Mitch McConnell, would not even consider for almost a year. And now you have somebody who is being proposed to be a Supreme Court justice by a man over whom a cloud of illegitimacy exists. And at the very least, the Senate Democrats should be saying, no vote until we know that the Trump administration is legitimate. Carol Gray, why won't Mike Pence eat a meal with women other than his wife? Carol, that's what he says he won't do. I think actually this is an issue that is incredibly prejudicial to women. I mean, think of it. Women at the workplace right now. You have a boss who says he's not going to have a meal one-on-one with any woman. Think of how that affects her career. Think of how that actually puts her at a disadvantage relative to men with whom somebody like Mike Pence or any other male who is in a position of leadership could get a FaceTime meal with. You know, I respect Mike Pence. If Mike Pence doesn't want, for some personal, moral issue with his wife, doesn't want to go out with well, at least go out in public. I mean, you know, what is the problem here? If maybe going to his home in private might be a slight issue, but going out in public, please. Barbie Alderman, why can't the Democrats in Congress make as much noise as the Republicans would if the tables were turned? Why can't the Democrats be as obnoxious as the Republicans have been? And we know that they have been obnoxious because we've witnessed it for the last at least 8 years of the Obama administration. Republicans have walked absolutely in a disciplined team. They have not said yes to anything. They have actually been disrespectful. They were not only not cooperative. I talked to you yesterday about how although Democrats in the Obama administration responded to letters and phone calls and any requests Republicans had in Congress, these Trump administration people will not even respond to Democrats in Congress. So the question is, it's the old question. Do Democrats take the high road, or do they go back in the gutter with Republicans? The fundamental problem, to put it in a nutshell, is this. Democrats respect government. They respect our system of government. Democrats feel that our system of government is important. Republicans don't respect government. They would like it and prefer it if most people basically had no trust, no faith, basically felt that government was bad and government could not run. And so you've got that asymmetry between Democrats and Republicans. I think it's important that Democrats actually do everything they can to show that that government can run, that government has the capacity to do what is good for the public. Debbie Rakestraw, what do you feel is the most pressing issue that Congress can address? Well, Debbie, I think the biggest issue, it's not going to address it. The Republicans don't want to address the issue I'm going to talk about, or going to mention, and Trump certainly doesn't want to issue. It's getting big money out of politics. It's making our political system work for average people. I mean, Trump sold the working class, white working class, a bill of goods. He said, well, the system is rigged against you, and I'm going to be your savior. I'm going to be your man. I'm going to be represent you. Well, that's furthest from the truth. He said he was going to drain the swamp, just the opposite. Donald Trump comes to Washington, and he puts more snakes and more alligators and more crocodiles in the swamp. He brings Wall Street Goldman Sachs into government. He brings billionaires into government. He brings people who are not going to care whatsoever about average people into government. Let's get big money out of government. That's the number one agenda item, at least I believe. Linda Wensrick. This is an ongoing annoyance. Why do trolls always bring up Soros? I know he's wealthy and he donates to democratic issues, but he's not the great puppet master. Is that what they are told on Fox News? Is it worth arguing about? Linda, listen, Fox News is going to say what they want to say. George Soros is not a puppet master. George Soros is not like the Koch brothers. Every time the Koch brothers comes up, people say, well, the Koch brothers are on the right and George Soros is on the left. Let me tell you something. The Koch brothers actually are financing all sorts of means of undermining democracy. And I'm talking about things, organizations like the American Legislative Exchange Council, ALEC, that comes into states and state legislatures and provides basically what corporations want. George Soros is not doing that. George Soros is not representing big corporations. The Koch brothers are representing oil and gas and fossil fuels and big corporations, and that makes that comparison between the Koch brothers and Soros absurd, ridiculous. Miko Brandini, what is your opinion on Rex Tillerson's recent visit to Turkey? Miko, as far as I can say, and far as I can tell, Tillerson is accomplishing absolutely nothing and antagonizing people all along the way. He doesn't understand diplomacy. He doesn't understand who our allies are and who our allies are not. He doesn't understand that he needs to shore up the people and the institutions and the countries who need to be with us. I mean, he's planning a visit to Russia. He almost didn't go to the NATO conference. They had to change the date to accommodate his schedule. And have you seen Tillerson? Has he had press conferences? I mean, Tillerson is secretive. Tillerson has not complained publicly at all. To my knowledge, Tillerson's perfectly happy to have the State Department's budget whacked by Trump in order to pay more for military. So Tillerson is the perfect Secretary of State if we wanted an administration that doesn't like diplomacy and wants military might instead of diplomacy. This is the last question. Shelley Landers. I love these daily videos and all the work you do. What can we do to help you? Shelley, I am so glad you asked what you can do to help. Well, first of all, share our live videos like the Resistance Report. Secondly, please watch and share our videos. We're going to put up a bunch of new videos very soon. We've been preparing them, and we're excited about them. They're short, 2.5 minutes. They explain what's going on. Please do share them. Visit inequalitymedia.org and also donate to inequalitymedia.org. When you visit that website, inequalitymedia.org, you'll see that there's a little box that says donate. We would certainly appreciate your donations. And of course, most importantly, and the reason we do this is to empower you to keep on resisting. And so, do so. And we're going to have some short videos next week that actually give you some hints at how to deal with town halls. Because the week after next, there's going to be a congressional recess. Members of Congress are going to come home. They're going to try to dodge you. They're going to try to say that they held town halls, and they didn't. We have been working with indivisibleguide.com in coming up with some very short videos that I hope next week are going to be very useful to you. So stay tuned. Watch this particular Facebook page and keep resisting. Keep doing what you are doing. And I will talk to you next week.